This is a selection of stories from the Financial Times, Tuesday, August 5th, 2014. All content belongs to the Financial Times. The Bank of England's head of financial stability has quit unexpectedly for a job at BP, leaving a hole at the top of the central bank just as it starts to flex its new powers to prevent future financial crises. Spencer Dale, who had been at the Bank of England for 25 years, resigned as Executive Director of Financial Stability only 2 months after he started the role. Economists said that his departure would be a setback for the Bank of England's efforts to master its new macroprudential powers, aimed at stopping systematic risks from building in the financial system. A person close to Mr. Dale said that BP had approached him, and at the age of 47, he did not want to wait before starting a career in the private sector. He will start as BP's chief economist in October. Mr. Dale was earning £189,606 a year at the Bank of England. In a statement, he said the offer to work with one of the UK's preeminent companies was too good an opportunity to refuse. Housing benefit is one of the fastest growing elements of the UK's welfare bill, despite attempts by the coalition to limit it. Current forecasts show it rising from £17 billion a year in 2008-2009 to £27 billion by 2018-19. The trend is in part the result of the coalition's decision to slash capital funding for new social housing while accelerating the sale of council houses. Mark Harper, Welfare Minister, said that the coalition inherited an out-of-control housing benefit system. We've capped benefits so no family can claim more than the average family gets by going out to work, he added. Britain is reviewing arms exports to Israel, worth £8 billion, in light of the country's military campaign in Gaza. Downing Street said yesterday that the government would look at each of the licenses granted to British companies to ensure they were not being used for internal repression or to provoke further conflict. The move is the latest sign the British government is taking a firmer line towards Israel, which has spent much of the last 2 days pulling back its troops from parts of Gaza as part of a unilateral 7-hour ceasefire yesterday. While UK ministers still back Israel's right to defend itself, senior members of the government have been more critical of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Mr. Cameron said yesterday that he backs the UN, which has called Israel's shelling of schools a moral outrage. Most of the arms contracts under review are for cryptographic software and military communications, though parts for weapons are also being sold. Campaigners are most worried about £42 million of arms export licenses granted to 130 British companies, including 2 supplying components for the Hermes drone and 1 selling components for Israel's main battle tank. Ministers have resisted calls from campaigners to impose a blanket arms embargo on Israel, arguing that such a move would not help the peace process. Germany has cancelled a contract to supply Russia with a €120 million combat simulation centre. Berlin's intervention will also raise fresh concerns about France's €1.2 billion contract with Russia for 2 Mistral helicopter carriers, the first of which is due for delivery this autumn and the second in 2015. France successfully demanded an exemption from EU sanctions for the deal out of concern for shipyard jobs and the potential damage of its reputation as a reliable defence contractor. But President François Hollande has faced harsh criticism from the UK, Poland and the Baltic countries over the agreement between Paris and Moscow. Yuri Borisov, Russia's deputy defence minister, said that the training centre would be finished on time despite the pullout of Germany. According to Russia's defence ministry, the German company's contribution was worth only 10% of the centre's 7 billion rubles, that's $195 million total value. From Nigeria to Somalia, US military presence on the continent of Africa is a creeping reality. US troops may be thin on the ground, with the Pentagon preferring to rely on training and financial support to allied forces, but special forces are now operating at any given moment. The trend has its most recent roots in the aftermath of the September 2001 attacks on the US, when US officials scoured the globe for ungoverned spaces with the potential to foster anti-US extremists. Either way, Islamist extremism in Africa has materialized just as the Pentagon and the CIA assessments foresaw. Today, as President Barack Obama opens the first ever summit between the US and Africa, combating militant Islamist groups is perhaps Washington's biggest priority in the region. US military strategy in Africa is coordinated out of Stuttgart in Germany. African states resisting Pentagon efforts to center the Africa Command, AFRICOM, created in 2006 on the continent, but as Linda Thomas Greenfield, US Assistant Secretary of the State for Africa, suggests, African leaders are more ready to now seek US assistance and ask the US to put security on the agenda. This was an issue that was brought to our attention, she says, by African leaders who were equally concerned about the rise of terrorism. The Ukrainian government imposed emergency laws doubling the rate of tax on gas production in the country to 55%. Though small in size, JKX Oil and Gas claims to be one of the largest non-state producers of oil and gas within Ukraine. Dragan Trajkov, analyst at company broker Oriel Securities, said yesterday the rise in tax from 28 to 55% would be manageable if the emergency measures, as planned, only stayed in place until the end of December. Since Stuart Gulliver took over as chief executive of HSBC in January 2011, many areas of the bank have shrunk, including its revenues, employees, and the number of countries in which it operates. Even its share price is lower, but one part of the London-listed bank has grown rapidly. It now has 24,300 staff specializing in risk and compliance, almost 10% of its entire workforce. This number is up about a sixth from 3 years ago. Much of this increased focus on compliance stems from an event almost 2 years ago that changed HSBC's strategy and caused it to become much more risk-averse. The bank paid $1.9 billion in fines and signed a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, or DPA, with US authorities in 2012, after admitting that it processed drugs trafficking proceeds through Mexico and transmitted funds from sanctioned countries including Iran. The DPA acts as a 5-year sword of Damocles over the bank, putting it at risk of a criminal conviction and potential loss of its crucial US banking license if it commits another crime in that period. Most analysts believe that after HSBC's shares fell 15% in the past year, they are set for a rebound. James Chappell, analyst at Berenberg, said that its interim results should encourage investors to revisit the name and the changes that have occurred in the last 3 years. Leif Johansson, chairman of AstraZeneca, tells the FT how a calm attitude let him focus amid Pfizer's approach. Some big AstraZeneca shareholders, including BlackRock and Schroders, made clear that they were disappointed by the failure to reach a deal in May with Pfizer. Did he feel embattled? Leif Johansson says, "I am a mild-mannered Swede, but I am also fairly strong-minded and cool-headed. So heat like that doesn't have much effect on me. I try to focus on the real issues." Another concern was the political risks surrounding Pfizer's plan to use the deal to move its tax domicile to the UK. This would have made it the biggest in a wave of so-called tax inversions by US companies looking to escape high rates. Scrutiny of such deals has since intensified in Washington, with President Obama criticizing corporate deserters who show a lack of economic patriotism. The pound edged higher after several days of consecutive losses against the dollar ahead of a key Bank of England rate policy meeting later this week. Sterling has been the strongest performing major currency over the past year, rising 9.7% of the back of the hawkish signals from the Bank of England and stronger more than expected economic growth. In July, however, the pound had the most losing sessions against the dollar since 2010 and fell 1.3% over the month. The currency's long-term rise has provoked a chorus of complaints from major UK companies. Last week, the IMF warned that the pound was overvalued. "We expect sterling to appreciate further," said Michael Sneyd, the currency strategist at BNP Paribas. "Our FX models," he said, "indicate that the pound would need to strengthen a further 10 to 15% before we could consider it overvalued from a macro perspective." This Thursday, the Bank of England will announce whether it will raise interest rates or leave them unchanged. The prospect of sooner-than-expected rate rises are also having an impact on the dollar, which rose significantly last week, hitting 10-month highs. Offshore drilling companies were hit yesterday after Deutsche Bank downgraded 4 companies in a re-evaluation of its stance on the sector. "We see significant further deterioration in the offshore drilling market," they say, as relatively flat demand is met with a relentless surge of new supply.